In Daniel Andrews' Victoria, things are not as they seem.
There's a thing they call Dan's freezer, and you get put in the freezer if you stand up to him.
Every Victorian can have faith that people in politics are working for them.
He's a really divisive character.
A very capable person, but he's not transparent.
Over a period of 8 years, he's consolidated power.
Whether it's red shirts, whether it's hotel quarantine, it is just so bad.
It's almost like there's a cult of Dan Andrews.
People don't speak up because their pre-selections are under threat. It's undemocratic, it's unfair.
I don't think we've ever been in a worse position.
Crossing Daniel Andrews will completely change your life. If you're down, he'll kick you to keep you down.
What happens to Victoria if Daniel Andrews is returned? Welcome to the place where Daniel Andrews rules with an iron fist. The world's longest lockdown, the worst state budget in the country, the biggest debt. A place where institutions are stacked with political mates, where anti-corruption reports have no consequences, where there's even a cloud over the police. It's a place where the health system is breaking and people die because government has failed them. A place where the hard-left culture war is suffocating. Still, there are some who believe in democracy, and they say people must know the truth before it's too late. Why is there a cult of Dan Andrews?
Because he's so powerful, because there's no opposition in the Labor Party, because there's no opposition.
When COVID hit Australia, Daniel Andrews moved fast to throw Victoria into an unprecedented state of emergency.
9 public housing towers will be the subject of a complete lockdown, effective immediately.
He drew all the powers he could into his control. He changed how government operated, disabled cabinet, and shut down the parliament.
We really just need to impress upon all Victorians that this is not over. It won't be over for a long time.
For over 6.5 million Victorians, it was the beginning of a new era.
It was crushing, psychologically, physically, mentally, on any metric, from child to the 90-year-old struggling for breath in hospital. It was crushing. But the unwillingness to accept responsibility for the mistakes or even really give us any detail on what happened is an appalling insult, an obscene insult to the families of those 801 people. I think that would have destroyed any other government.
If you thought the Premier was already powerful, well, COVID made it absolute.
The government wants to test every single resident over the next 3 days.
6 statewide lockdowns, 263 days. Fundamental freedoms stripped away, businesses destroyed, and hundreds of lives lost.
I don't think we've ever had those draconian situations in this state, even during wartime.
No, we didn't have curfews, you're right. We did not have curfews.
We did not have that situation.
Things like the 5-kilometre curfew, which the police allegedly wanted. The police didn't want it. They never asked for it. It was just done. Why?
I call the member for Melbourne Ports.
Michael Danby is a former federal Labor MP with 20 years in the Parliament and double that inside Victorian Labor.
To serve the Commonwealth of Australia has been the greatest honour of my life.
Like many, he's dismayed at the party's current direction. But unlike others, he says if you want to fix it, you can't stay silent.
We didn't have to, Dan Andrews, shoot people with rubber bullets outside the shrine.
And they are dispersing rubber bullets again.
Can you imagine that a Labor Party did that? In the old days, there would have been a meeting of 5,000 Labor Party members and he would have been condemned.
I've not seen a worse government, I don't reckon. I've been 50 years in journalism. Haven't seen a worse government.
Mornings on 3AW.
There is, you may be aware, an election close.
Neil Mitchell's the king of Melbourne's airwaves. He spent a lifetime holding politicians from all sides to account.
The Premier, this is an official statement from the Premier, has called a press conference for 11 a.m. He loves a press conference, doesn't love questions, he loves a press conference.
But when it comes to the Premier, he hasn't had the chance because Andrews has refused to front for over 5 years.
I don't think he likes me, Peter. I don't think he likes me.
Is he scared of the scrutiny?
Oh, it's hard to believe he'd be scared of the scrutiny. It's hard to believe he would not have the confidence to take on some idiot behind a desk. He'd rather run a social media outlet that avoids all questions.
He's ruthless.
Oh, he's ruthless, there's no question. He's ruthless and he's very clever.
As we started making calls for this documentary, a whistleblower came forward. She was sincere, raw. We spoke for over 3 hours. Incredibly, she's a former Labor minister. But so scared is she, Daniel Andrews can destroy her. Even though she's left the parliament, we've had to conceal her identity.
Crossing Daniel Andrews will completely change your life. If you publicly cross him, and I don't mean in the media, but publicly in front of colleagues, then you'd be singled out, and in fact, the punishment can extend beyond life in politics.
There's a well-known place for people who cross Daniel Andrews.
Well, there's a thing they call Dan's freezer, and you get put in the freezer if you stand up to him.
What he'll do is he'll mark somebody out who's disagreed with him, and he'll step in and he'll throw the first punch, if you like. Then he'll stand back. And that's the signal for everybody else to come in and finish off the job.
He's a very powerful individual in this state, and there are plenty of people that have been sidelined or put under the bus.
He says he's a champion for women. He'll stand there in the firing line and do all that, but then he treats women appallingly behind closed doors. And if you're down, he'll kick you to keep you down.
The night I was elected to Parliament in November 2018 was one of the happiest days of my life.
Our whistleblower ex-minister isn't alone.
Pointing, laughing, mocking.
When Kashalia Vargela first joined the Parliament, she was a member of Labor's Socialist Left, the same faction as Daniel Andrews.
But my happiness was short-lived as a systematic bullying campaign soon began against me.
To better serve her constituents, she says, Vargela moves to another faction. And that's when Andrews sent in his henchmen.
I was verbally assaulted and stood over at the ALP state conference. Despite knowing my bullying complaints, the Premier would brush past me at events and publicly embrace the bullies and their friends as if to reward and encourage their bullying behaviour.
I wasn't entirely surprised.
The Premier's comment,
to be honest, I'm not here to talk about that person,
was the last straw for Vargela. She resigned from the Labor Party and is now running for re-election as an independent.
I reject these claims. I reject these assertions.
For Daniel Andrews, it was just another day at the office.
He's dismissive. He doesn't call women by name. Look how he referred to Kashalia Vargela. I don't think he has a regard for women.
Was there a question there?
Well, you did say the buck stops with me, but that appears not to be the case. Do you not agree?
No, I don't. I want to be as respectful as I can. You've just put it to me that findings have been made. No findings have been made.
I said that council
yes, you did.
assisting
You said
had recommended.
No, I'm sorry,
Rachel.
Rachel.
She fined.
Rachel.
Bit silly for them to have to wear a mask, though, isn't it?
Well, but what's the issue, Rachel? Seriously, what's the issue?
The sarcasm, I think, is next level. It's this sarcastic. Can't be bothered with you. Who do you think you are? The kind of stuff that I've seen, and it's almost like he wants to humiliate you.
If that's how Daniel Andrews treats his Labor colleagues, if that's how he treats many in the media, well, what about the unions? They're militant in Victoria, but they've been very significant in his electoral success. Do you think firefighters have been sold out?
Absolutely sold out. No argument about that. Absolutely sold out.
The outspoken Peter Marshall is in charge of the powerful Firefighters Union of Victoria, which in 2014 was key to Labor's win from opposition. how times have changed. This election, they're at war with Daniel Andrews.
How do you come to terms with the fact that you're being betrayed by the government that says they supported firefighters, the very government that you stood by in 2014, the very government that you protect their family while they're in Parliament?
It's been proven that firefighters contract cancer more often than the general population because of the toxic chemicals they absorb through their skin while fighting fires.
The betrayal is over a special compensation scheme set up to help firefighters who end up with cancer caused by their job.
But the Andrews government has just betrayed firefighters by trashing these laws.
Without consultation, the Premier has upended this special scheme by changing the eligibility criteria.
Help the firefighters who protect you.
Firefighters say he's put the scheme at risk, and that's why they're so angry. Having fought so hard for so long, the betrayal cuts deep. But firefighters are not taking it lying down. Instead, they're playing the Premier at his own game.
Every time I enter a house fire to save life and property, these toxins leach into my skin. Over my career, they've given me cancer.
How hard was it for you to go public?
It's difficult.
Yeah. Not easy, is it?
It was a difficult decision. However, I'm certainly passionate. This is not just about me. This is about firefighters across the state. So they shouldn't have to be in a position where they're going to have to battle an insurance company for a cancer that is related to the work they do. I'm asking Premier Andrews to reverse these changes to protect sick firefighters.
With the Labor Party, forget who you elect to office. It's the factions that wield the real power. In Canberra, the factions choose who sits in the Prime Minister's cabinet. Not Anthony Albanese, the factions choose. In Victoria, stitching together factional deals is how Daniel Andrews operates.
Firefighters face adversity every day. And one thing I don't like is trying to be stood over by a politician to begin with, by anyone. You have to ask the question, which I've asked and I'm still struggling with, why did you do this? Was it a factional deal?
Do you think Daniel Andrews is the sort of guy that would do a factional deal, but...
Oh, look, this is a factional deal. Let's cut the rubbish. This is some payback to someone else in his faction. It just doesn't add up.
So that means the blood price is firefighters?
Absolutely.
I think the Labor Party has been transformed by him into a sort of a personal fiefdom. It's almost out of Animal Farm. You know, you really can't recognise the Labor Party of the past from the one that's currently there now.
If Bob Hawke was back in his Victorian seat of wills, would he recognise Victorian Labor today?
It's unrecognisable. He wouldn't recognise it. And there are lots of people who feel the same way, particularly at a federal Labor level, but they're not in a position to be able to do anything about it.
In Victoria, there was a saying, the only thing Daniel Andrews didn't control was the Labor Party. For years, he'd been a factional warrior of the socialist left. To get ahead, he knew he had to get runs on the board for his faction. But standing in his way wasn't the Liberal Party. It was more personal than that. It was his own side. It was the right faction of Labor and their power broker, Adam Somyurek.
Just after 9 a.m. this morning, I met with Adam Somyurek and I informed him that I would be writing to the Governor to terminate his commission as a minister, to essentially sack him from my ministry.
Adam Somyurek from the factional right has been butting heads with Andrews from the left for years.
No one considered him to be a leadership material. He just got there because of a factional deal stitched up on the organisational wing.
Inside Victorian Labor, Somyurek often stood in Andrews' way until he was caught red-handed in a sting that wiped him out and concentrated even more power in the hands of the Premier.
But the way I see it working now is that you're going to do the grunt work.
These pictures were the undoing of Somyurek. They allege the orchestrated use of taxpayer staff to do factional work for Labor.
They'll go from not being factional to they understand they're in a faction, because it's a whole system.
These images are what prompted the suspension of voting rights for members and the appointment of administrators to run Victorian Labor. Somyurek was thrown out of the ALP, and when that happened, he chose to speak up about the infamous red shirt scandal, where taxpayer staff helped get Daniel Andrews elected.
I'm the most scrutinised politician in Australia. This has never happened before. Two integrity bodies have gone through my life with a fine-tooth comb.
Is this what now passes for justice in Victoria? That Labor MPs can simply refuse to cooperate with the police investigation and that's the end of it? Adam Somyurek admits he broke the law. He says he wanted the police to interview him and sensationally says what happened to him was a setup to weaken Labor's right faction and strengthen the power of the Premier. You say that Labor MPs were instructed not to talk to the police.
Yes, we were advised not to talk to the police. I mean, when you're talking to an MP, you can't really instruct, but we were advised strongly to do a no comment. No, if they come and grab you, do a no comment interview.
What I have here is a leaked affidavit addressed to the Independent, Broad-Based Anti-Corruption Commission, Victoria's IBAC. It's a 29-page sworn statement from a high-ranking detective in the fraud squad. It's damning. In chapter and verse detail, it alleges corruption inside Victoria Police during its investigation into Labor's red shirts rorts. It claims the investigation was obstructed, that it was set up to fail. It claims 17 Labor MPs were protected, and it outlines here exactly how it was done.
Somyurek's defence is that he did all of this because in his area the Socialist left broke the peace treaty that they had and started branch stacking in federal and state electorates around him. So I wish IBAC had looked into those things, and it was very peculiar when Somyurek was taunting the IBAC commissioner about why don't you look into other people, that the IBAC commissioner didn't.
IBAC Commissioner Robert Credlin.
The IBAC investigation into this issue was known as Operation Watts. The IBAC Commissioner, former Supreme Court Judge Robert Redlich, delivered serious and damaging findings against the Andrews government.
The unethical culture that was such a feature of this investigation, whether as an explanation or excuse for bad conduct, lies at its heart.
We've seen it with the red shirt rorts, where we would expect to have a proper independent inquiry and we'd expect to see what would come out of it.
The Galbally name is famous in Melbourne. A distinguished lawyer, now businessman, Francis Galbally, speaks openly of his dismay.
We know taxpayers' monies were improperly used, and now, of course, the greatest concentration of power will occur at the end of this year because Mr Andrews certainly doesn't want Mr Redlich to remain as the IBAC Commissioner.
But as bad as the political scandals might be, it's the ambulance crisis and a broken health system that's dominating headlines in Victoria. Former nurse Georgie Crozier is the Liberal Shadow Health Minister.
So people are sick, they're needing an ambulance, so they ring 000. They can't get through to 000. When they get an ambulance, the ambulance can't get the patient unloaded into the emergency department because they haven't got a bed in the hospital. So you've got problems right through the system. And that's the critical point here because far too many people have died.
My dad, Alfred, died on our front lawn after our desperate calls to 000 went unanswered. The fact that we couldn't get any help was unbelievable.
Alfred Edwards was one of 33 people to have died as a result of Victoria's 000 crisis. Men, women, children, even babies. An ambulance was called, and that ambulance never came, or if it did, it was too late. A recent report by Emergency Management Victoria proves just how much the system is failing Victorians. Ambulance response times for Code 1 emergencies, so the most critical of all, are now worse after 8 years of this Labor government than they were before Daniel Andrews was elected. Heaven help you, quite literally, if you or someone you love needs to call 000.
He's not only been Health Minister, but he's been the Premier, so he's been in charge. It just beggars belief what is happening at a ministerial level, at a department level, and in the Premier's own office, why these warnings were ignored.
Having been elected on a promise to fix the ambulance crisis, this isn't the only broken health promise from Daniel Andrews. Early in the pandemic, 4,000 extra ICU beds were announced.
And now we're going to fund another 4,000 intensive care beds, taking us to a total of 4,500.
18 months later...
The notion that we're going to have 4,000 beds down at, a warehouse somewhere, turn the exhibition buildings into an ICU unit, and then have a nurse at the foot of each of those beds practising hospital corners, no, that's not how it works.
Those 4,000 beds didn't eventuate. So to say flippantly, 4,000 intensive care beds, and then I might add, he denied that he ever said it, but it's there on tape.
Oh, it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking, and the ambulance crisis in particular. They've been working for 10 years to fix something, to fix the phone system in 10 years. I mean, you can build a rocket to the moon in 10 years, but we can't fix the 000 system. And the opposition takes some blame for that for 2 years. The rest of it's been Andrews. But that's just disgraceful.
State elections turn on issues like schools and hospitals. So how is it in a state where the health system is catastrophic that Labor is still in the race? Because in Daniel Andrews' Victoria, things are not as they seem. It's a secret state. Mates are in powerful positions, and the Premier allows no dissent inside his government or outside it.
We are the most progressive government in the nation.
I think he's more confident.
Everyone right to go?
He's more arrogant. He's more dictatorial, more ruthless.
I take full responsibility.
Well, has Labor let Daniel Andrews become more powerful than the party itself?
It has.
If there's one thing I've learned after almost 2 decades in the backroom of politics, it's respect your opponent. Never underestimate them. Now, like him or not, the operation around Daniel Andrews is one of the most sophisticated there is. It's driven by a back office that's bigger in staffers and budget than even the Prime Minister. Just over 50 staff for the PM versus 90 plus for the Premier. Advisors, strategists, spin doctors, all working for a leader obsessed with control.
Remember, this is the man who, when I got a leak, demanded the mobile phones of every member of Cabinet to see who was leaking to me. And delightfully, the leak didn't come from Cabinet. But he went through the phones.
Hi, I'm Dan Andrews. Like most people, my family lives with the reality of level crossings each and every day.
Social media is front and centre when it comes to promoting the Premier. And that's where access to the public purse becomes critical. On Facebook, more than $1 million of taxpayers' money has been poured into the Dan Andrews promo page. There's 1 million followers, 700,000 more than the Prime Minister. In the world of social media, there's no journalists, no questions.
Yeah, that social media model he's using is very, very clever.
Everyone right to go?
There was no more crucial time to manage the message than the 9th of March, 2021. The Premier had suffered a nasty fall. Broken ribs, cracked vertebra, and a stint in intensive care. During his recovery, Andrews all but disappeared for 3 months.
Hi everyone, I just want to provide you with an update.
And then, just days before he was due back at work, this slickly staged film went out on his social media.
When you have a traumatic moment in your life, you kind of reassess things. You work out and you remind yourself of the things that are really, really important. You know, family is important.
What's key is it's used to explain the circumstances of his fall, which by then was the subject of a lot of conflicting rumour.
I didn't really connect with the step, it just slid straight off. I became airborne almost.
In political strategy, it's the sort of device you use to cut off questions when the politician's back in front of the journalist pack. Sorry, says the politician, I've already dealt with that.
It was awful because you were going blue and we were looking at each other and I was thinking, you're going to die here in Sorrento.
Let's give Daniel Andrews and his wife the benefit of the doubt that she, in her own words, thought he was going to die. So why no lights or sirens for the Premier's ambulance?
You fracture your vertebrae, like anyone who's had a serious back injury knows how painful it is and how long the recovery is.
On the day of his fall, Daniel Andrews tweeted that he'd slipped on some stairs, but a photo of the holiday house where he fell shows no stairs, just 2 steps. And in their statement, that's what Ambulance Victoria called them, steps. 3 months later, in his comeback video, Andrews changes his tune.
I didn't really connect with the step, it just slid straight off. I became airborne almost.
None of this adds up. It's also carefully staged managed, these explanations raise more questions than they answer. He's got one of the most sophisticated social media engine rooms that I've ever seen in politics. That's part of his success, isn't it?
Oh yeah, that social media model he's using is very, very clever, and it's a bit hard to get a serious debate or a serious question going in a handful of characters, but that's what he wants. It just gets a message out. It's embraced, it's spread, no analysis.
But there are some stories the Premier can't spin his way out of. On the second day of the election campaign, Andrews woke up to this.
So here we are, you know, quite a number of years down the track, trying to get the truth out there.
Peter Muleman is talking about the time his son Ryan was critically injured after the bike he was riding collided with Daniel Andrews' taxpayer car on the Mornington Peninsula. His wife Catherine said she was driving at the time.
The young cyclist hit our car with such force that it was a miracle that he wasn't more seriously injured. It was horrible, it was frightening. You know, the kids were in the back, they were crying, we were all covered in glass.
I got punctured lung, ruptured spleen, broken ribs, and I was internally bleeding.
Ryan, who was 15 when the accident occurred in January 2013, claims the Andrews car was speeding. The Premier and his wife say it was the other way around.
It was the young cyclist's fault, he hit our car. You know, we're grateful that the police decided not to charge him. Go, go, go.
You know, I'm just grateful, and my wife is very grateful that he wasn't more seriously injured.
Daniel Andrews has always maintained that Ryan, riding a girl's push bike, T-boned his car. But these just released pictures clearly show the impact was near the front of the vehicle. And even though you can see the shattered windscreen on the driver's side from the force of the impact, well, Andrews still drove the car away from the crash site, returning sometime later. Was that safe? Was it legal? Could vital evidence have been compromised? And then there's also this. The police failed to breathalyse Catherine Andrews at the scene of the accident. Victoria Police later said they simply mucked up. Ryan Muleman has now got himself a lawyer.
So if getting the truth out there can help somewhat to get my son's life back on track, then that's what we're here for.
I've canvassed these matters in great detail, and I've got no further comment to make.
The Premier was in full shutdown mode.
I can only refer you to my earlier answer.
17 questions and 4 minutes later, the answer was still the same.
Which is why I've got no further comment to make.
You've known him a long time. How's he changed?
Oh, he's become a lot surer of himself.
Has Labor let him get too powerful? Has Labor let Daniel Andrews become more powerful than the party itself?
It has, yeah. And that's something backed from Canberra, where all of his plans in state and federal pre-selections are backed by the National Executive.
Daniel Andrews has never had a life outside of politics. After university, he entered the party machine, becoming Victorian Labor's Assistant Secretary. An ambitious man in the back room, he was always determined to get into Parliament, and he did, winning the seat of Mulgrave in 2002. 5 years later, on the front bench as Health Minister. Then, after Labor lost office in 2010, Andrews was handed the top job as Opposition Leader. Who is Daniel Andrews? Do you reckon we know who the man is?
No, I thought I knew him because he was always knocking on the door during opposition and I spent a lot of time with him. I thought I knew him. I've got a lot of close friends who thought they knew him, but it's a different man now. We don't know.
November 2014 was when the cult of Daniel Andrews took centre stage.
And to be able to do it with my best friend has been so special. Kath, thank you so much.
In his first election test as leader, he brought the party back into power. It was a narrow win, but having beaten a one-term Liberal government, the unlikely Andrews was a hero.
I think he's more confident, he's more arrogant, he's more dictatorial, he's more successful, more determined, more ruthless. All these things I didn't see in opposition, but maybe they were there, they were just waiting to come out. Maybe he was just playing opposition leader, which a lot of people do.
4 years later, in 2018, Andrews faced a first-time opposition leader in Liberal Matthew Guy, and he increased his majority, something few governments ever do.
Friends, we are the most progressive government in the nation.
The Premier was on a high. He'd not only been re-elected, but picked up a swag of seats, 11 in all.
We are the most progressive state in the nation.
Now safely a majority government, Andrews unleashed his woke crusade, allowing people to change the gender on their birth certificate, no medical assessment required, every 12 months. Words like pregnant woman replaced by birthing parent, street prostitution legalised, and much more. Is he remaking the Labor Party around Australia in his hard left image?
I'm afraid he is, but I think that's also due to the widespread adoption of sort of what I would call that anti-worker woke ideology.
So why has Daniel Andrews taken Labor so hard to the hard left?
Well, the hard left Greens are a threat to Daniel Andrews, and so he changed his mind after the Northcote by-election that was won by the Greens. And think of what he said. He said no injecting rooms when the injecting room got up and running. Well, there is heroin and ice, there are drug deals. What does it say about this government that just continually to lie to the Victorian public? I mean, this is about politics. It's not about what's right for the community and what needs to be done.
Most political leaders, if they're any good, have someone in their ranks prepared to stand up to them, to tell them what they don't want to hear, but invariably need to be told. Do not enough people stand up to him?
Probably. Probably not enough people stand up to him. He can be a political bully when he wants to, within his own party, within the media. Within the media, he tends to either seduce or intimidate, but then that's not new to politics. But he's very intimidating. He is the best bully I've seen.
In the post-Dan Andrews era, I don't think there'll be anyone as powerful and as pervasive and as wrong as him. It's hard to say this to Victorians and Australians, but this is the first time ever in Australian history that at a federal and a state level, the Labor Party is led by the socialist left. I mean, no one in The Age or the ABC uses that phrase, but they're the people who run Victoria. And the fact that you can't say this or that it's not relevant is incorrect.
There are many issues and allegations that have come back to haunt Daniel Andrews over the years. How he's treated his colleagues, secret deals with the union, branch stacking inside the Victorian Labor Party, to name but a few. But it's a decision he made when he was Health Minister that's front and centre in this campaign. You set up your own catering business. You love food, you love people, and you were pretty successful.
Yeah, we would. What I would say is we were doing okay.
In fact, Ian Cook was doing better than okay.
Put them into trays like this one.
Starting out nearly 3 decades ago, he turned iCook Foods into a business worth around $25 million.
1, 2, we get 3 across.
Tell us what happened to your business the more successful you became.
If I go back to 2009, so 2009 is when Community Chef starts.
And what's Community Chef?
Community Chef is an organisation that was funded by the Andrews when he was Health Minister.
Mm-hmm.
He gave them $6 million to get started. They got $10 million from Anthony Albanese when he was the Infrastructure Minister.
So Community Chef, let's be clear, was a taxpayer-funded competitor to what you were doing.
Correct. Now, it doesn't pay payroll tax, doesn't have to go to tender. They had a specific exemption. Money just got spent and it became a bottomless pit.
iCook Foods was a market leader in the world of pre-packaged meals for hospitals and aged care homes. It was making money where the taxpayer-funded Community Chef was losing it hand over fist. Then in 2019, a patient dies with listeria poisoning at a Melbourne hospital. The list of companies that provided meals to that hospital included Ian's firm, iCook Foods. And it's this link that led to a visit from the Dandenong City Council, the same council that also happens to be a part owner of Community Chef.
So on the 18th of February, Elizabeth Garlick turns up to supposedly do an inspection.
And who's Elizabeth Garlick?
She's the environmental health officer. We used to call them health inspectors.
What happens next beggars belief.
Hello, Leanne's phone. Elizabeth speaking.
Ian Cook says the health inspector planted a slug on his factory floor. And he's got the CCTV footage to back up his claim.
So our cameras show Elizabeth Garlick. So she walks up to the back corner where the slug is found. As she walks around, my brother, who was one of our food safety supervisors, is standing beside her and he's looking straight in the corner. He doesn't see a slug. And that's where she crouches down. She's there crouched over for 17 seconds. And you think about that. 1, 2, that's a long time. Then she gets up and says, "I've found a slug." Michael steps around in front of her. She doesn't realise Michael's taken a photo, so she thinks she's got the only photo of this slug.
This is the photo Ian's brother took. Look closely, there's a small bit of tissue near the slug. And this is the photo the health inspector submitted, where the tissue has miraculously disappeared.
When she comes back in on the Wednesday, she makes a beeline for where she dropped the slug. And she looks down, then she looks at a container, and then her head comes up and she spots the camera. And then she goes, "Oh dear." And she does this classic double take.
To this day, the health inspector from the Dandenong Council denies planting the slug.
Are we going to just follow the recommendation of the Chief Health Officer and close him down now?
Someone who has studied this case closely is former Victorian Chief Commissioner of Police,
Kilglare, take 1.
the respected Kel Glare.
And of course the whole setup in relation to iCooks was obviously a deliberate attempt to put them out of business in favour of a business run by councils, owned by councils at the time, called Community Chef.
More than 90 charges were brought against Ian Cook and his company. That led to Victoria's Health Chief Brett Sutton shutting down iCook Foods. But for Ian, the matter was far from over.
Now you have to tell your story. You need to get into the media and tell people you didn't kill this woman, because at the moment, everybody thinks that iCook Foods has killed someone, and you clearly haven't done that.
Looking at all the evidence, and I have, there was clearly a conspiracy to put them out of business.
In the end, all charges against Ian and his company were dropped. And the woman who died with listeria? It's been confirmed she did not consume anything from iCook Foods.
I think that Ian Cook's story is a magnificent one because it is a true David versus Goliath. He's taken on the department and the government over the closure of his family business.
Ian Cook is now suing the Dandenong Council and the Victorian Health Department for $50 million in damages. At what point did you say, this is just too much, I can't keep going?
Yeah, that's... I need to be careful here.
It's got to be tough, Ian.
It is. You know, a couple of times I said to my wife, this is really tough, and it's been extraordinarily tough on her as well. And we both looked at each other and said, you know, we can't let this stand. There are times I wanted to give up, but you just take a deep breath and say, nope, I have to stand, I have to be on my feet, I have to win.
You're right to go.
We are entitled to have governments that are ethical,
Barrister Nicola Gobbo,
accountable and competent.
So that every Victorian can have faith that people in politics are working for them.
He has all the institutions in his pocket.
It's about all of us getting rid of Andrews. It's about right and wrong, and corruption's always wrong.
Can Daniel Andrews lose the unlosable election?
I think it'll be far closer than the public polls are predicting.
It's said power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Is that where we are in Victoria? You be the judge. Right across the board, people have been put into positions of authority where their connection to the Premier might come in handy. The very institutions that are supposed to guard against excess government power. But if they're stacked with the Premier's mates, how much protection does a citizen really have? How concerning is that for the integrity of the Victorian government?
It's enormously concerning because you've got to have some impartiality there. You don't want these bureaucrats to be pure patsies to the government.
Francis, at the heart of democracy is the Westminster system. I don't know that enough Victorians understand how that has been disabled in Victoria.
That's right, Peter. It's the separation of powers, which is the fundamental tenet of our democratic process. You have the Parliament and the government through the Parliament. Then you have the institutions, the executive side of the government, and then you have the judiciary. So what's intended is that you stop dictatorships by having the separation of powers. Now, what Dan Andrews has done, and very smart he is doing this, over a period of 8 years, he's consolidated power. He has all the institutions in his pocket. He has the police now because his friend Brett Curran, who worked for him for many years, is now Deputy Commissioner, and that should never have occurred.
Brett Curran was an insider in the Premier's private office. He was then appointed as Assistant Commissioner at Victoria Police, who were embroiled in the ongoing fallout from Lawyer X.
The identity of lawyer X, who snitched on high-profile gangland clients, can finally be revealed as former defence barrister Nicola Gobbo.
Lawyer X is perhaps the greatest failing we have seen of our judicial system. The failing being that the police effectively had a criminal lawyer turn on her clients. Well, the consequences would go to the upper echelons of the Victoria Police. And I think the Victoria Police would prefer that there is nothing further done in relation to that.
Has anyone at Victoria Police been charged or lost their job over Lawyer X? No, they haven't. But then that's Victoria under Daniel Andrews.
We are entitled to have governments that are ethical, accountable and competent. And I don't believe we have any of those things at the moment. In my 84 years, I've never seen a government as corrupt. And I make no apology for saying that. I believe that there's a whole host of matters where they are seriously wanting in ethical standards.
This brings us to WorkSafe Victoria, the body supposed to keep workplaces safe. It's headed up by another long-time Andrews confidant, former Labor staffer, Colin Radford. And here again, 801 dead, linked to failures in hotel quarantine, and not one person charged over those deaths. And it gets murkier, with the Premier having just appointed one of his old Cabinet colleagues, former Labor Minister Bob Cameron, as the new chair of WorkSafe Victoria. What does Daniel Andrews gain by putting people that are loyal to him in these roles?
Well, they will make decisions, and that is the problem, where you have appointments that are made to senior roles, they are close to the Premier, and then they will make a decision that, should I do this, should I do that?
You're right to go, Camos, you all set?
Our whistleblower and former Andrews government minister on this very point.
The cult of Dan, I'm struggling to find the words. He has just embedded himself so much. He's gotten away with so much bad behaviour. It feels like there's nothing that can trip him over. Nothing he can't do.
Because there's another question over here that I've indicated we're going to come back to.
Everything Daniel Andrews has done to date in Victoria is about holding on to power. It's often said in modern politics that oppositions don't win elections, rather governments lose them. Just take a look at May's federal election. Michael Dammy, I'm not going to ask you can the Liberals win the state election, but I am going to ask you, can Labor lose it?
Look, it's possible, but very unlikely.
Premier.
Thank you very much, Speaker, and I do thank the Leader of the Opposition for his question.
You were a long-time observer of politics. We saw Bill Shorten lose the unlosable election. We saw Jeff Kennett lose an unlosable election. Can Daniel Andrews lose the unlosable election?
He could certainly lose it. I don't think it's over, but it's unlikely.
Here's a sobering thought.
Your Excellency, I present the Honourable Daniel Michael Andrews to be the Premier of Victoria.
If Daniel Andrews is re-elected...
Mr Andrews, I invite you to take the oath of office as Premier.
He will become one of the longest-serving premiers in Victoria's history.
Here, what we've had now is we've got a leader that prevents anybody else from trying to do anything against what he says. It's my way or the highway, that's it. And that's a bad thing for democracy.
I hope to win, I want to win, I think I can win, I'm sure I can win.
Matthew Guy was the Liberal leader at the last election.
What are you going to promise us?
Another pool!
Where Labor increased their majority. Talk to me about Matthew Guy, because he's done the toughest job in politics Leader of the Opposition once. He's come at it again. I see his press releases, you know, the turnover, the work ethic is there. Why hasn't he cut through?
It's a really tough question. I've got no idea, really. But I think the media mood has swung, at least from adulation or fear of Andrews, back towards the middle and towards Guy. Might be too late, I don't know.
If the polls are to be believed, Andrews is ahead. But the polls have been hit and miss in recent years, and everyone says it's difficult to poll the mood in Victoria given how hard the lockdowns impacted the state. But one man willing to try and turn the tables is the new independent candidate for Mulgrave, Ian Cook.
I'd like today to announce my candidacy for the seat of Mulgrave in the upcoming election.
Ian Cook believes there's something rotten in Victoria,
Corruption and the preventing of corruption in Victoria.
and he wants to change it. He's taking on Daniel Andrews in his own electorate.
It's about right and wrong, and corruption's always wrong. And I hammer that with everyone I can to make sure they understand that that's what it is about. This isn't a normal political situation. You know what? You may love your Labor Party, you may love your Liberal Party, but the Labor guy, he's not Labor values. He is taking Team Labor into a place that is very dark. We want you to talk about getting rid of corruption.
If you get elected, have you got the stomach to do the clean-up job that's really needed in Victoria?
Absolutely. I promise you, if I get elected, I'm guessing this Parliament's not going to know what hit them.
Whoever wins the Victorian election faces a massive task. To put it simply, Victoria's a mess. Record debt, the highest projected state debt in Australia, higher than New South Wales, Queensland, Tasmania combined. Ambulances that don't arrive on time, and a health system on life support. Can you understand how people around Australia hear all of this and look at Victoria and wonder why on earth it's such a basket case, and wonder why on earth, if the published polls are to be believed, Victorians are going to vote this bloke in a couple of weeks' time?
I do understand that, but what they don't understand is what we live under. They're not living under a government like the Andrews government.
So what happens to Victoria if Daniel Andrews is returned? What's it look like?
It looks like a divided place, I think. We've got massive, no matter who wins, we have massive financial problems.
The once vibrant city of Melbourne is struggling.
I think Melbourne today is a dead city when you walk around. There's a lot of bad things about Melbourne. It's not safe.
We're still hurting, I believe, from those lockdowns. They were incredibly harsh. We had the harshest of restrictions with the worst outcomes of anywhere in the country. And I think people are still very much traumatised by what has happened. I hear that every single day from people.
Democracy is meant to be government by the people, for the people. Is that what we have in Victoria? I asked the Premier for an interview, followed up multiple times, never heard back. You've heard from some of the people closest to Daniel Andrews, decent Labor people, legal experts, a former Chief Commissioner of Victoria Police, a powerful union leader. Their verdict is in. Now it's your turn to decide what sort of leader you want, what sort of standard you will accept. If this is what 8 years of Daniel Andrews as Premier looks like, what will another term mean for you, your family, and Victoria? Do I think Victoria is broken? Yes, I do. So it's up to you now to fix it.